2 minutes. That is all this takes. Not 2 minutes of exercise. Not 2 minutes of a complicated breathing protocol. Not 2 minutes of anything you have to learn or prepare for. 2 minutes of something most people actively avoid every single morning. Cold water, not an ice bath, not a cold plunge tub, not a cryotherapy chamber. Just the last 2 minutes of your regular morning shower turned cold. Here is what those 2 minutes trigger inside your body. Your body contains two completely different types of fat. White fat stores energy. It is the fat you are trying to lose. The visceral fat wrapped around your organs, the belly fat you can see and feel. Brown fat does the opposite. It burns energy to generate heat. It is packed with mitochondria, and it is metabolically active in a way that white fat never is. And cold water is the most powerful known activator of brown fat that exists. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine confirmed that brown adipose tissue is present and metabolically active in healthy adults, and that it is inversely correlated with BMI and body fat percentage. The leaner the person, the more active their brown fat tends to be. 2 minutes of cold water every morning begins activating that system before you have eaten your first meal, before you have done a single workout, before your day has technically started. Stay with me because the cortisol effect from cold exposure, which I will cover in the fourth part of this video, is the mechanism that surprised me most when I first read the research. Most people assume cold water creates stress and raises cortisol. The research shows the opposite happens, and the specific reason why is not what you would expect. Before we go further, drop a comment right now. Do you currently end your showers warm or cold? And have you ever tried finishing with cold water even for 30 seconds? Before the mechanisms, you need to understand what brown fat actually is and why it matters specifically for belly fat. Most people know about one type of fat: white adipose tissue. It stores excess energy, it accumulates around your organs and under your skin. It is what you see when you look in the mirror and what you feel when you press your abdomen. But your body also contains brown adipose tissue. And it does something completely different. Brown fat is named for its color, which comes from an unusually high concentration of mitochondria. These mitochondria give it the ability to burn fuel, glucose, and fatty acids to generate heat. This process is called thermogenesis. When your body needs to generate heat in response to cold, it activates brown fat to do it. Brown fat essentially burns white fat to keep you warm. Adults have less brown fat than infants, but it is still present and still functional. The question is whether yours is being activated regularly or sitting dormant. Research from Cell Metabolism published in 2021 found that cold acclimation through brief daily cold water exposure for 10 days significantly increased brown fat glucose uptake and measurably improved insulin sensitivity compared to baseline. 10 days of 2-minute cold exposure. Measurable changes in brown fat activity and insulin sensitivity. And here is the specific connection to visceral fat. Visceral fat cells, the fat around your organs, have a high density of beta-3 adrenergic receptors. These are the exact receptors that norepinephrine, the hormone released during cold exposure, binds to. Visceral fat is disproportionately responsive to the norepinephrine signal that cold water creates, which means when cold water activates your brown fat and releases norepinephrine, visceral fat is among the first fat depots mobilized for fuel. The fat you most want to lose is the fat that responds most strongly to this signal. Here is exactly what happens inside your body during those 2 minutes. The moment cold water contacts your skin, thermoreceptors send an immediate signal to your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus activates your sympathetic nervous system. Norepinephrine is released. Norepinephrine is both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. In the context of cold exposure, it has two simultaneous jobs. First, it binds to brown fat cells and switches them into active thermogenesis mode. They begin burning glucose and fatty acids to generate heat. Second, it mobilizes fatty acids from white fat stores to provide fuel for that thermogenesis. Visceral fat, with its high receptor density, releases fatty acids quickly in response. A study published in the European Journal of Applied Physiology found that cold water immersion produced norepinephrine increases of 200 to 300%, and triggered measurable fatty acid mobilization from visceral fat stores within minutes of exposure. 200 to 300% increase. Within minutes. This is not a slow metabolic adaptation that takes weeks to appear. It is an acute hormonal response that begins the moment cold water hits your skin. The fat burning starts immediately. And it continues after the shower ends. When you step out of the cold water, your body is still working to restore core temperature. This post-cold thermogenesis continues for 30 minutes to 2 hours depending on the individual and the temperature. A study in the Journal of Clinical Investigation found that brief cold water exposure elevated metabolic rate by 15 to 22% for up to 2 hours after the exposure ended, driven by continued brown fat activity and sympathetic nervous system activation. 15 to 22% higher metabolic rate for up to 2 hours, while you are just getting dressed, making coffee, and commuting to work. The fat burning is running in the background of your morning without any additional effort. This is the mechanism that surprised me most and that most people get completely backwards. The common assumption is that cold water creates stress and therefore raises cortisol. If cortisol raises, fat storage increases. So cold water should make belly fat worse. Here's what the research actually shows. Cold exposure does create a brief acute cortisol spike. In the first 30 to 60 seconds, cortisol rises. That part of the assumption is correct, but what happens immediately after is the opposite of what most people expect. Following that initial spike, cortisol drops below its pre-cold baseline, faster and lower than it would have fallen without the cold exposure. Here is the mechanism behind that drop. When your sympathetic nervous system activates sharply in response to cold, and then the stimulus ends, your parasympathetic nervous system rebounds strongly. The harder your sympathetic system was pushed, the more decisively your parasympathetic system pulls back in the other direction. You feel calmer after cold water than you did before stepping in. That is not placebo. It is your parasympathetic nervous system establishing dominance after the brief sympathetic activation. And with parasympathetic dominance comes lower cortisol. A study published in Psychoneuroendocrinology found that brief cold water exposure produced an acute cortisol spike followed by a rapid return to below baseline cortisol levels, with regular cold exposure training improving cortisol recovery speed over time. The study went further. People who practiced regular cold exposure showed a blunted cortisol response to subsequent stressors throughout their day, not just lower cortisol after the shower. Lower cortisol reactivity to everything that followed. Your difficult morning meeting produced a smaller cortisol spike. Your stressful inbox produced a smaller cortisol spike. The traffic that would have elevated your cortisol for an hour produced a smaller response, because the cold exposure had trained your HPA axis to respond proportionally and recover quickly. Lower cortisol reactivity throughout the day means less fat storage signal running in the background of your life. Visceral fat accumulates in a high cortisol environment. You are systematically reducing that environment from the first 2 minutes of your morning. There is a fourth mechanism that most cold exposure research does not lead with, but people who practice it consistently report it every time. Reduced cravings throughout the morning. Here is the biology behind it. Norepinephrine from cold exposure has a mild appetite-suppressing effect. It temporarily reduces ghrelin, your primary hunger hormone, in the period following the exposure. This is a separate pathway from the fat-burning mechanisms we already covered. The same norepinephrine that activates your brown fat and mobilizes visceral fat also tells your brain that hunger can wait. The effect is not dramatic, but it is consistent and meaningful. People who implement daily cold showers frequently report that their 10 a.m. snack craving disappears or significantly reduces. They naturally consume less food in the morning hours without consciously restricting anything, not because they are trying harder. Because their appetite hormones are running at lower levels from the norepinephrine response to cold water. This connects to everything we have covered in the eating habits and afternoon habits videos. Morning appetite control cascades through the day. When your hunger signal is lower in the morning, the impulse eating that drives unplanned snacking between meals is reduced. When snacking is reduced, insulin stays lower between meals. When insulin stays lower between meals, fat-burning mode is accessible for more of the day. 2 minutes of cold water at 7 a.m. is still influencing your fat storage environment at 3 p.m. The mechanisms are compelling, But what do they produce in actual people over actual time? A Dutch research team studied a group who implemented a hot to cold shower protocol for 30 consecutive days. Not 2 hours in an ice bath. A brief cold finish at the end of a normal morning shower. They made no changes to diet or exercise. The cold shower group reported significantly higher energy levels throughout the day, reduced sick days by 29% over the following 3 months, and measurable improvements in body composition over the study period. The University of Maastricht published research in 2014 showing that participants using regular cold showers demonstrated measurable increases in brown fat volume and metabolic rate over a 10-week period compared to a control group. The brown fat grew, not just activated. The volume of metabolically active brown fat tissue increased from consistent cold exposure. That means each subsequent cold shower is burning more fat than the previous one, as your brown fat capacity expands with training. The same 2 minutes produces more fat burning in month 3 than it did in week 1. The technique matters more than most people realize. Doing this wrong reduces the benefit significantly. Doing it right maximizes all 4 mechanisms simultaneously. Step 1. Shower normally with warm water. Do not change your usual shower routine at all. The warm water serves a purpose. It opens your pores, relaxes your muscles, and creates a temperature contrast that makes the cold more effective. Step 2. In the final 2 minutes, turn the temperature to the coldest your tap can deliver. If 2 full minutes feels impossible at first, start with 30 seconds. Build to 60 seconds over the first week. Build to 2 minutes over the second week. The adaptation happens faster than most people expect. Step 3. Keep the water on your entire body, not just your arms and hands. Your chest, upper back, and neck are the areas with the highest concentration of brown fat deposits. These areas need direct cold exposure to create the strongest activation signal. Step 4. Breathe slowly and deliberately throughout. This is the most important technique point. Your natural instinct during cold shock is to gasp and breathe rapidly. That rapid breathing reinforces your sympathetic nervous system activation. Instead, slow your exhale. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. This breathing pattern simultaneously engages your vagus nerve and begins the parasympathetic rebound while you are still in the cold water. You are training your nervous system to recover faster from cold stress with every breath. Step 5. Do this before breakfast, not after. Eating before cold exposure redirects blood flow to your digestive system. Cold exposure simultaneously redirects blood flow to your skin and periphery. These 2 signals conflict and can cause nausea in some people. Shower, cold finish, then eat. That sequence maximizes every mechanism. Cold exposure works well in isolation. It works significantly better when stacked with the other habits we have covered. After the cold shower, drink your warm lemon water. You are combining thermogenesis activation with morning rehydration. 2 mechanisms targeting belly fat from opposite temperature directions in the first 10 minutes of the day. Step outside for 10 minutes of morning sunlight immediately after. Cold exposure has already begun setting your sympathetic nervous system toward daytime alertness. Morning light locks in your circadian rhythm at the same time. Your cortisol curve, your melatonin timing, and your brown fat activation are all aligned in the first 15 minutes. Wait 90 minutes before your coffee. The norepinephrine from cold exposure provides alertness for the first hour of your morning without caffeine. When coffee arrives 90 minutes later on top of the natural cortisol decline, it lands on a stable system and works cleanly. Eat your protein before the coffee. The appetite-suppressing effect of norepinephrine from cold exposure is already reducing your morning hunger. The protein extends that effect for another 3 to 4 hours. You have now stacked cold exposure, sunlight, and protein into the first 90 minutes of your morning. All 3 are targeting cortisol, brown fat, and appetite from separate biological directions. The compound effect of those 3 habits is considerably more powerful than any one alone. Not every healthy practice is appropriate for every person. Cold water exposure has specific contraindications that matter. If you have cardiovascular disease, consult your doctor first. Cold water creates a brief increase in blood pressure and heart rate. For most healthy adults, this is harmless. For people with existing cardiac conditions, it warrants medical guidance. If you have Raynaud's disease or poor circulation, cold exposure can trigger a vasospastic response. Again, consult a doctor before starting. If you are pregnant, check with your doctor before implementing this. Outside these specific situations, cold water exposure at the end of a morning shower is well tolerated by healthy adults and has a strong safety record across decades of research and centuries of cultural practice. One practical note: if you feel dizzy or excessively unwell during the cold exposure, reduce the duration or the temperature. Some people are more sensitive to cold shock than others. Progress gradually rather than forcing a full 2 minutes from day one. The goal is daily consistency at a manageable level. 30 seconds every day produces more cumulative benefit than 2 minutes 3 times per week. Here is everything we covered about 2 minutes of cold water every morning. 4 mechanisms running simultaneously from one habit. Mechanism 1. Brown fat activation. Cold water triggers norepinephrine, which switches brown fat into thermogenesis mode, burning glucose and fatty acids to generate heat. Mechanism 2. Visceral fat mobilization. The same norepinephrine directly mobilizes fatty acids from visceral fat stores, which have the highest receptor density for this signal in your entire body. Mechanism 3. Cortisol reset. A brief acute cortisol spike followed by a below baseline cortisol return, plus blunted cortisol reactivity to subsequent stressors throughout the day. Mechanism 4. Post-cold thermogenic afterburn. Metabolic rate elevated 15 to 22% for up to 2 hours after the exposure ends. Running while you commute, work, and start your day. The technique that maximizes all 4. Warm shower as usual. Final 2 minutes at the coldest temperature available. Entire body exposure, including chest, upper back, and neck. Slow controlled breathing throughout. Before breakfast, not after. Every day, not 3 times per week. Here is what I want you to sit with. You have been looking for something sustainable. Something that does not require an hour at the gym. Something that does not require a complicated meal plan. Something you can actually maintain for years without it feeling like punishment. 2 minutes of cold water at the end of your existing shower requires nothing new. No new time slot in your day, no equipment, no cost. Just 2 minutes of discomfort that your body rewards with 4 separate fat-burning mechanisms running through your morning. The discomfort is real, but it lasts exactly 2 minutes. The metabolic effect lasts for hours. Try it tomorrow morning. Just 30 seconds if 2 minutes feels like too much. Come back and tell me what you noticed in the first week. Which of the 4 mechanisms surprised you most today? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. If this changed how you think about something as simple as the temperature of your morning shower, subscribe to What Science Reveals. Real science explained clearly every single week. And if you want to see how this connects to everything we have covered about morning habits and breathing habits, those videos are linked right here. They work together as one complete morning system. See you in the next one.